much. Garbagif, Aristóch, Hachta, Onadi Paibli, and I see my erstwhile mentor over here, Desmond O'Malley, in the front row. You're welcome. Gone are the days, Desi, when you could fly into Westford in the old helicopter for the Oireachtas golf competition. I think you played well that day as well, too. Anyway, glad to be here in a county that's half of my own. Thank you for your words, Joe. I see Jim McGuinness across the street, and obviously what Donegal did on the pitch the other day speaks for itself. I think there are a lot of Kerry people. Yeah. I have noted, since I came here, that there are at least 15 Kerry County Councillors in the vicinity. They're not here to listen to me. They're here to find out what's the trick. So, you never know, Joe and Dinny, you could be bringing back that erstwhile friend of ours, whom we haven't seen for 61 years now, Mr. Sam Maguire. You never know, so good luck to you. Let us say, at the McGill Summer School here, on this day, the 23rd of July, 1929, the fascist government in Italy banned the use of foreign words. And indeed, in the workings of the governance of our Irish Republic over the last number of years, there were words that were not just foreign, but alien. I spoke about some of these here in this hall 3 years ago as Leader of the Opposition, when I had the chance to speak at the McGill School. Words like responsibility, ethics, probity, duty, heart, conscience, ancestors, light, and indeed spirit. In my first opportunity and privilege of addressing the Dáil Taoiseach, I used some of those foreign, alien words. And I'm as adamant now as I was then that to reform our country, to rebuild our fragile and our precious and our still young republic, we have to rehabilitate those alien words. We must restore those exiled and those disregarded qualities, those previously disgraced empathies and sensibilities to our public and to our national life. The man from up the road, Seamus Heaney, says, you have to try and make sense of what comes. You have to try and make sense of what comes. I had the privilege down in Cork recently of speaking at an occasion in respect of the American Ireland funds. There were 3 speakers, former President Clinton, and Seamus Heaney, and yours truly. I happened to be in the middle, and I described it a bit like following the Gettysburg Address and before the unveiling of the first reading of Ulysses. But anyway, I believe that there was a sense of national shock and disbelief at what headed our way in recent years, how to make sense of it, and that parents standing mute at airports watching their newly adult children pack their degrees in beside their bitter disappointment and head for Australia or the States or elsewhere, where it was already tomorrow. And hard-working men and women wishing that the ground would open and swallow them up as they queue up for unemployment assistance. People of pride, people of conviction, people of belief. And they felt that that was beaten out of them. And Seamus Heaney also said, remember everything and keep your head. And that's exactly what I've tried to do with the government that's been elected now for 15 months. Is in the midst of the worst crisis that hit us since the Civil War, we've tried to keep our head, to keep faith with the people who elected us, not to run away, but to make tough decisions, to make fair decisions, to do what they knew was going to be hard and uncomfortable and uncompromising in the mandate to sort it out. Because they knew, as we did, and they know, as we know, that this is the right thing to do. They knew it and they felt it, because their lives and their hopes and their dreams had been crushed by the actions of a broken banking system, by their bonus culture, by generations of the kind of politics where the cutest hooers of 50 years ago would look today by comparison as new and shiny as a class of junior infants on their first day at school. That's what we're dealing with. Yes, we remember that. We've kept our head, which is why we can make the necessary and the tough decisions to rescue our economy, to restore our reputation, and to rebuild our country. But we know that to achieve even half of what we want to, for our people, for our country, we have to do that, and we can only do that through changing structures and by reform. Reform of our public services, reform of our legislature, and reform of our political system. I've said before that to guarantee the kind of change that Ireland needs, it is no longer sufficient to do what is correct. Rather, we must also do it right and do it in the right way. And for both parties in this government, the Fine Gael party and the Labour Party, reform is the right and the urgent thing to do, being able to do more with less, achieving better, higher quality services with a lower budget and with fewer personnel, giving people a new pride and a new hope and a new confidence in the political process itself. Because the Republic, res publica from your days in Latin, is always and must always be about the public and about the public's affairs. And in addressing these public institutions, there is no time to wait and there is no time to waste. In fact, many of the reforms that I spoke of here 3 years ago are now underway. On being appointed to government 16 months ago, the government gave its immediate attention to the crisis in our economy and took decisive action to stop that decline and to arrest that decline. Because the scale and the speed of the economic collapse had exposed clearly the inadequacies of politics and of our financial institutions. And those who were tasked to be in charge failed to anticipate the risks and failed to act when that wave fell. And it was clear to us that reform of the economic model was absolutely fundamental. Competitiveness, that Celtic tiger orphan had to come back in from the cold. And that's why the action plan for jobs published by the government has become the reforming document to restore competitiveness. It has 270 actions in there that support companies and entrepreneurs to increase exports and to increase trade, to enhance productivity, and to engage in research, in innovation, and in development. Because we've had too much of what I often refer to as the bríomhar saor, which we used to learn going to school, the bríomhar saor, in Irish political leadership for far too long. So in keeping with our agenda, our urgent reform agenda, I actually transferred responsibility for monitoring that action plan, together with the Minister for Jobs and Enterprise, into my own department of the Taoiseach. For what it's worth, it still carries a measure of clout at cabinet level, that people understand that things are timelined, that things are required to be done, and if you provide sufficiently strong and clear leadership, things will be done. So we are determined to reform the previously sheltered sectors of the economy so that we can address high business and consumer costs. We're in the process now of introducing new legislation to open up the legal profession and the medical profession to more competition and greater transparency when it comes to pricing. In fact, in the area of the legal profession, the shake-up here is the biggest in over a century and a half. In a century and a half, there has never been as significant or as sweeping of change in the legal profession as is now happening. Of course, there are those who want and need and desire to maintain the status quo. But where change is required, no one body or no one sector will be exempt from the reforming arm of the government, including politics itself. And we will not allow special interests to set the national agenda. It's too important. And I meet too many people from all sectors of Irish society across this country who passionately cry out for courage to change what they know has to be changed, and not to get sucked into the vested interests and sidelined by those who say you simply cannot touch this area here. We began this process by tackling government-imposed business costs, reducing red tape, beginning to restore business confidence and certainty to Ireland. And that's why I say to business people all over the country, or indeed academics like yourselves, if you've got an idea, if you've got a proposition, if you've got a view of where something is blocked that should open the doors to business and opportunity for young people, I want to hear it. I want to hear it directly, so that government can prove that not only does it hear and listen, but is also prepared to act. As I said, our job is to take that pebble out of your shoe. And whatever the business is, I invite people anywhere in the country to say, give me your proposition. There's so many ways we can connect now. And the recent statistics, for what they're worth, show clearly that for the first time in quite a number of years, Ireland is now climbing the ladder again. We're in the top 20 globally for competitiveness. That's good for business. It's good for potential. It's good for exports. It's good for belief of people. And my ambition by 2016 is not to be at number 20, but to be at number 1. We're there in terms of productivity, flexibility, availability of skilled labour, and a range of other areas. There is so much more that we have to do in terms of competitiveness, be it in the area of energy, or transport, or climate. All of these areas are of importance to us. But the crisis also exposed the urgent need to reform our public services, to make them fit for the 21st century's challenges and demands. Now, this government does not have the luxury of an endless pot of money to fund all and sundry. How many times in the past have we seen situations where one crisis or another erupted, and the answer was, throw money at it, as if that's going to deal with it? You know, I often said to Minister McGinn, I opened a school down the west last year, which cost €1 million, just €1 million. Buy, build, fit out, beautiful building. And I wish all those who teach there and the children who will go there the very best of luck. But before I said my few words, immortal or otherwise, or everlasting or otherwise, the thought struck me that you could actually build 3,000 of those every year for 10 years with what's been flushed down the toilet in terms of recapitalisation of Anglo-Irish Bank. 30 billion over 10 years. You just think of what you could do with the effective spend of money in so many areas across our country where that facility is available to us. But we have to deal with the consequence of that, and are. So this is going to involve some pretty challenging and courageous decisions of looking at all government entities, all of them, and judging whether they can continue to stand alone or separately. We're overseeing the downsizing and therefore the cost of the public service in the public sector to 282,500 by 2015, while protecting frontline services and making these decisions in the fairest way possible. Last week saw an important change in the Labour Court in relation to sick pay arrangements for the public servants. That will result in increased productivity, reduced absenteeism, and a significant reduction in the costs. This cannot go on as it went on in the past. Simply can't. Also on the agenda, clearly, is pension reform, which is a challenge of enormous proportions when we look at the difficulties that many of the defined benefit pension schemes are in, and the way our demographics will be in 20 years' time. So it's a matter for government over the coming months to decide how best this can be achieved and put in place the systems and the structure to deal with that for the time ahead. These stepping stones, if you like, may be seen as consequent of decisions taken about the delivery of a new universal national pension scheme that is seen by the Irish public, by men and women, public and private, to be fairer, to be more sustainable and more effective at supporting people in their retirement. Our health and our social services are commencing a programme of transformation. In many ways, it's been like looking down at the jungle. You can see the clearings, You know, there are some brilliant people operating out there and doing their work, but the accountability in terms of the effectiveness of spend of taxpayers' money is nothing like what I'd like to see. And that's why in the area of health in particular, we need to change the structure so that there is a far greater impact and effect in terms of the spend of people's money, so that those who need it most at the front line of services are not neglected. In the social services area, the Pathways to Work scheme is already paying dividends. Time was in the past, as you know, somebody unfortunately lost a job, sign on for the unemployment, and there you go. It's changing now, because people are being interviewed. What's your experience? What's your competency? What would you like to do? Group interviews, individual interviews. And thereafter, the challenge is to provide opportunities for those people, the vast majority of whom want to go to work every day and want to contribute to their local economy and, as a consequence, their country. And Pathways to Work is changing the culture, the nature, the structure of the way social protection has been given out in this country for very many years. So it's a case of removing welfare traps by committing ourselves that it's always better in the national interest to do a good day's work than to be dependent upon welfare. We want to build a single-tier health service supported by universal health insurance to guarantee equal access to the best possible medical care based not on what money the patient has in their pocket, but on the treatment that they need and that they should get as close to them as is feasible and is possible. The start of this was publishing the HSE governance bill last week, which is the first major step in a long overdue reform and overhaul of that system. We were told that the HSE structure would deliver world-class services for everybody. And in many places, in many ways, there are some brilliant people working in there. But the structure has not delivered in the way that it should in the interest of the public, and therefore it's got to be changed. This presents a challenge, not just in this country, but in other countries also. Health is always something that you can never know until it strikes your own door, what the impact and the outcome and the facilities that are available. And when we had the big change from those leaving the public service at the end of February, we were told that you were going to have a series of catastrophes across the country. And I would commend all those clinical teams, those medical teams, those nurses and doctors, those managers in hospitals who drew up local plans, who signed up for them, who changed their rosters, who travelled to accommodate these measures, who actually proved what I said in the very beginning of this contribution, that they were able to do more with less and have really effective frontline services, despite the fact that you didn't have the Taoiseach money that you had in the past. In terms of political reform, this is a case, if you like, of, physician, heal yourself. Because to drive the scale of reform for which we have a passion and a hope and commitment, we have to start by reforming the political system itself. I believe that our political system has failed, and abjectly so, to live up to the vision and the ideals and the wisdom of the founders of this state. It's got to change, and change it will. This day, 3 years ago, I stood here at McGill and I said to you, our political system is broken, our political culture is discredited, we cannot fix our economy or create a just society unless and until we also fix our politics. I said that Ireland needed a new politics. And during the election, and the run into that election, people gave us a mandate on the basis of the reform, in part, that we showed we're keeping faith with them. And we want to show them now that the standards that they set for their own lives will be demanded and reflected and enshrined at the heart and in the heart of what government actually does here. Because the government that I lead, believes that corruption is not a victimless crime. It ruins lives. It ruins livelihoods. It ruins a country's standing, and it destroys a country's reputation. It was the same attitude to power and to governance that left this country utterly incapable of dealing with the crisis that headed its way in those bleak midwinter days in 2010, when talk of the IMF was like one of these games of chicken, but played across Merrion Street by people who should know and who are tasked to know and to do so much better. Since coming to power, as a government interested in reform, we have been developing further and taking direct action to tackle this concept, this reality of corruption. Last week, new legislation was passed to bring greater transparency and accountability to the political funding system. Under this government, there is now an effective ban on corporate donations above €200 unless corporate donors register with the standards in public office. Political donations to political parties and individuals are also being significantly reduced across the board. The anonymous threshold donation is now reduced to €100. There is now clearly transparency. There will be no more doubt, no more suspicion in the relationship between business and politics. And as one who has the privilege of leading the country, I understand just how important it is to understand business, so that government, through its decisions and the agencies of government, can open the doors of opportunity for business to do business in a legitimate fashion, so that our economy can grow, that it can prosper, and that people can be employed in their own areas, in their own country, if that's what they wish to do. And as for corrupt politicians themselves, the days of getting away with it are now over. Minister Shatter is working on a range of innovative legislation which will include provisions for the convictions of ministers, TDs and civil servants where corruption would be involved, or where corruption would be determined. And if convicted of corruption offences, Oireachtas members could be subject of a court order to forfeit their office and to be excluded from seeking office again for up to 10 years. So, as I said outside, Rome was not built in a day, and neither will the new Republic of Ireland be built in a day. But we're delivering on our promise to make the institutions more transparent and more accountable to the Irish people. And included in this pathway to transparency and accountability is comprehensive legislation on the protection of whistleblowers and on the registration of lobbyists. Last year we had a referendum on the question of whistleblowers, and the people, in their wisdom, made their decision, and I respect that. We've got to deal with this in a different sense now by the provision of appropriate legislation. Enhanced central bank regulatory powers, including strengthening its ability to impose and to supervise compliance with regulatory requirements and to undertake timely interventions. There's a new aura, a new image, a new perception of the Irish Central Bank now. And the Irish Central Bank, along with the other banks, attends on a regular basis at meetings of the Economic Management Council, which I chair myself. These things can be very complex and tortuous, as you can understand, but the perception of the Irish Central Bank has certainly changed in the past 12 to 15 months to a bank that knows where its strategy is and is moving clearly in the right direction. The separation of civil and criminal aspects of cases by revenue has to be considered by government. The Mahan report confirmed our own political instinct, the need to act swiftly and to act decisively to ensure a fully accountable, fully transparent political and planning system. Last week's whole of government response was published, summarising all of the actions on each of the 64 recommendations that were made. In short, 43 recommendations already have or will be implemented partly or fully, while 18 recommendations remain as being considered by government under new policy and reform in those areas. There are only 3 that government do not propose to implement at this time. As I said, tribunals end up in findings and recommendations. The findings are for the statutory authorities, the recommendations are for government. And the day that Moriarty was published, and I accept the Moriarty report in its entirety, we sent the report to the statutory authorities for their consideration in respect of the findings, and government are moving to act in respect of the recommendations, which are the responsibility and duty of government. Public trust, as you know, is a fragile and a very precious commodity, and something that was missing in large swathes of Irish political life for a long time. I'm determined to restore faith and trust and hope in our political institutions through the programmes of reform that we follow. These things do not happen overnight, but there's a very clear path and strategy here. The tribunals and the collapse of the economy showed the governed and those who did the governing who were unfit for office and their systems unfit for purpose. A sorry state of affairs indeed in a little country like ours. We've done one of the most important things of all here in our reform of the political system. We've made a start. Sometimes they say you're afraid to do it, you haven't the courage, you don't believe in it, but we've started that process. We operate under Bunreacht na hÉireann. We have our institutions, we have our systems in the Oireachtas. You have to look from a range of experience at what is the best thing to do and move on with a programme of making it happen. So we started with Dáil reform to make the day-to-day practice of politics more real and accountable, such as overhauling the committee system means that when government approve the heads of a bill, you can send those heads of bill to the Oireachtas committee for their political reflections before the bill is ever published, because inevitably you get very good and deep-ranging political views about issues of the day in respect of the heads of whatever the bill might be. The Dáil sits on Fridays. Members of any party, opposition and government, are now entitled to produce and prepare and present private members' bills on issues that they consider of sufficient national importance to warrant that, and government allow members of all parties and none to have that opportunity. We want to continue with this, and there are a range of changes that will happen in the time ahead to make that even more effective. Because I'm at this long enough, I like to think that we can sort of stop the pollution of our society, and that we have an Oireachtas that is clear, that is responsive, that allows for people to be able to present their case by way of private members' bill or whatever else, to re-establish a moral code and proper order to public life, that people can have a sense of faith and trust in it, and restore public confidence in politics and in government, in what it means to be a real citizen of a real republic, indeed what former Minister O'Malley spoke of many years ago in his view of the republic. Now, the government that I lead is clearly committed to a referendum to ask the people, do they want or do they not want Seanad Éireann to continue? It's part of the process of downsizing the scale of politics in the institutions that we have. And both parties in government campaigned on this before the election, and the commitment in the programme for government is to put a referendum to the people in due course, asking them that question, and that's what will happen. I note today a letter from 6 former members of the Seanad on the national papers saying, well, we served there, you should reform this. We've had 70 years of talk about reforming Seanad Éireann. The fate of the Seanad is now in the hands of the people, and that process will continue until the people give their verdict. Some have argued that the citizens of our republic should not be allowed to take this decision. I believe that they should. Some argue that the only choice that should be given is between the current Seanad, which even its defenders acknowledge is not working in the way that it should, and some type of reformed second house. Well, I respectfully disagree with that. The political system, as I said, has been talking about this for over 310 years, and nothing's happened. Well, it's going to happen now. It's time for the Irish people to be consulted on this question, and they will give their verdict in due course. There are some practical matters that need to be dealt with and they run into this process. We hold, for instance, the presidency of the European Union from the 1st of January next year. That's going to be a pretty significant presidency. we follow Cyprus, we're before Lithuania and Greece. It may well be that the multi-financial framework concept, in other words, the budget for the European Union, may well have to be dealt with during that presidency. There are a number of other very serious matters in there that may fall in the Irish presidency. This will be our 7th presidency, and in fairness, irrespective of what government was in office, Ireland has always run its European presidencies very effectively and very well indeed. And let me assure you that insofar as the logistics for this are concerned, ministers are working exceptionally hard, both with their counterparts in Europe and in respect of the whole process of getting the arguments that need to be decided on the table in a structured way. So in due course, the people will be asked to give their verdict on Shannon Éireann, because I believe that you have to prove that you're serious about these things, about your own political process, because some would say you're afraid to do it. We don't lack in courage. It's just a question of timing and strategy to get this right, and you in Donegal and from all over the country will have your say in that. So we have to remember to tread, carefully and with purpose in what we do here, because there isn't any point in rushing to judgment and destabilising a system that may work pretty well, but that you'd like to improve in whatever sector it might be. So I reminded you earlier on of what Seamus Heaney said, remember everything and keep your head. But just 5 years ago, the government of the day produced a programme that contained very worthy promises to improve local government, to foster civic participation, and to pursue electoral and political funding reform by establishing an electoral commission. See, well, reforming promises are never enough because they come back to bite, as we all know. Reforming action actually is what's required here, which is why we already announced the beginning of the work of the Constitutional Convention, where ordinary Irish citizens from north and from south, politicians from north and south, come together to discuss constitutional reform, a new concept for our country. We've had committees of the Dáil and the Oireachtas which sat before and did excellent work in respect of new constitutions, reform of the constitutions, but they never followed through. There's much more than fostering just civic participation. The Constitutional Convention will be an influential advisor to government, and will be guided by its advice and its recommendations. This is the people's year in terms of political and constitutional participation. I'd like the Constitution, the Convention, to move from Dublin to Cork to Galway to Donegal or wherever. Let the people see how this operates. Let the people give their views at those meetings. As you know, it will be comprised of 100 people, 66 citizens, 33 from the political process, north and south. We've given it 2 fairly distinct issues to deal with, first of all, in terms of the reduction of the voting age and the length of the presidential period of service from 7 years to 5 years. These are simple insofar as you can say, I can give a direct answer. What we feel is that the presidential period be reduced from 7 to 5 to bring it into line with the other statutory elections now, which are the local elections and the European elections, and have all of that. That requires building a constitutional bridge between a period and so on. So, when the Convention considers those and gives their recommendations, what I've said is that government will respond within 4 months of their making a recommendation, and that government will indicate in that response a yes or no to holding a referendum on the issue in question. There are a number of issues that are outlined in the programme for government that they will consider, and it's a matter for the Convention themselves as to how they want to go beyond that and take other issues that they think are of considerable national importance that would warrant constitutional consideration. Now, given that the government are committed to holding a referendum in respect of child protection and in respect of the question on Shannon Éireann, it may well be that if you're going to have a series of other referenda, we need to consider this very carefully. We had a presidential election and 2 referendums on Monday last year, and people said, I'm a bit confused about some of these issues here. I don't have adequate time to have them teased out properly. So I think we need to reflect on that, on the issues that might be put before the people in multiple form on any one day, and decide what is the best thing to do, and we will. Our local government system, as you're aware here in Donegal, has seen no major reform since just after the famine. We're adamant that we want to make local government a viable and a trustworthy organ of the state and an integral part of a reformed political system. We have to, because local government impacts on every single person in almost every aspect of their lives. And right now, in Ireland, local government has essentially fallen into a space where it shouldn't be. It's lost, in fact, in terms of its importance in the people's minds. You can't blame local government itself for that, because it's languished, while government after government ruminated over whether they should do something about it or not, as opposed to sort of driving reform here. And our people become disillusioned when this happens, and they become disconnected from their councils. And yet, in places around the country, you can see real response from local authority, where community comes together, and where community and local authority, working with the different agencies, can do brilliant implementation of programmes and plans. See, local communities are best served, or are they best served, by having 114 local authorities, 1,640 councillors, 8 regional authorities, and 2 regional assemblies. Now, we need to have a discussion about this with our people as to whether we can get this thing. In China, they've got 9 people in charge of the whole country. I met Premier Wang Jiabao out there, and maybe we should consider that. And so it's time to radically reform how democracy actually works and how services are delivered. And key to all of this is consistency and connection with the community and the citizen, because that's my only interest, the people. That's who make us and break us in politics. That's who give us our mandate and our responsibility, and that's who takes it away when they think it's appropriate. So in my view, it's time to address the democratic anomaly whereby local authorities are responsible for rates and for services that have huge impact on local business, but have no direct responsibility for helping those businesses to develop. How many times have we sat at council meetings, and myself I was one for 20 years, where the issue late into the night or the early morning was, what rates are you going to apply on the commercial ratepayers now? And with your tax base so narrow, the costs began to rise, and therefore it became uncompetitive for many people, and many people are hanging on in business, hoping that we can rectify our economic circumstances and that the position will improve insofar as national confidence is concerned here. So we have to move to a point where local business, here in Glentees or in Donegal or anywhere else, can see the local authority as, an element that's going to help them with their integral business, be productive, part of the local community, and that doesn't see them just as merely as a taxable entity. I think there's a case for a revolution here in working together in the interests of every local community and therefore our economy in conclusion. So with all these new responsibilities will come methods of and levels of accountability, which will be certainly enhanced, I think, greatly by the sweeping changes in legislation on corruption, on ethics and on reporting. And local government has certainly serious potential to bridge the gap between people and politics. So far from being beaten down by those who seem to wallow in the trenches of disillusionment in this country, I refuse to get in there with them, because I know from meeting people all over this island, all over this country, and abroad, of their conviction and their belief, which is deep within us as Irish people, that if there's a problem, explain the scale and nature and challenge of the problem, and I'll help you fix it, but do not tell me that all is well in the garden when I know it's not. In other words, level with the people, and they will help you sort out the problem in everybody's interests. And our interest is not just in enhancing our economy and improving our prospects, but to give a life to those who come behind us, and that if they want to live and work and rear their families in this country, that we should give them that opportunity. And that's what good, effective politics and focused politics should be about. So what I want to do here is to reform and to rebuild a lean and a country where we have effective spend on the taxpayers' money, and that they can see where it's actually going and the benefits that come to them as a people. So, When you talk about reforming and rebuilding, you suggest sometimes, a modern and a lean and at times an astringent approach to our national and to our public life. But there's actually more to it than this, as I've discovered recently, because our notes and our words and our tunes and our songs, our stories and our spirit are as important as anything else. For years we've wondered about the Asian Pacific countries, and we've tried to treat them as a single page, that they're all the same, that the same sort of interest will deal with them all. And yet, these countries have different cultures and different peoples in enormous numbers. China and Japan are as different as Antarctica and Saudi Arabia. And you've got to understand that there are cultures and different things that drive these people, besides mere statistics about economics and manufacturing, profit and all of that. And it is in there that the Irish have always connected so well. And because we are a people, and from this county, one of the worst affected after the famine, with emigration to Scotland and the States and everywhere else, we know what it's like to be a stranger in another man's land. We know what it's like to understand interdependence and interconnectivity. And that's why in a digital age that we never dreamed of before, we can tie all of these people together, and they want to help us in our challenge as we face the future. And that's why we're tying in the advice, the information, the experience of business people in so many sectors who work in other countries, the Far East or the Far West, and get their advice before you put your toe in the water, so that you know what the structure, strategy, and the way to make that connection in terms of our business is. And that's why the words that I spoke of in the beginning are so important, that we rehabilitate those in terms of who we are as a people. And I might say this before I finish. One of the things that I noticed last year when I had the privilege to travel to Britain or to the States or wherever, in meeting people who wanted to invest in our country, they said, "I'm confused about where you are now. What is your corporate tax rate? What are you doing in terms of your economy? Show me you're serious." And that's why when the original claims to increase the corporate tax rate came from colleagues around the table in Brussels, were very clear about that. They were not moving anywhere, either up or down. 11.9 effective, 12.5% across the spectrum. I have mandated Minister and Minister of State and everybody else that when they attend their meetings, that they also meet people on the fringes and those involved in business who have connections with Ireland, to reassure them that we are very focused on what it is that we have to do. And that reputation, I have to say, and I'm very glad of this, with the help of so many people across the world, has now been restored, to the point that when President Clinton spoke at his economic conference in January in New York, he said, if you are considering investing in Europe, and you should, look at that little island of Ireland. Look at what they offer in terms of their demographics, which are the best in Europe for the next 25 years, in terms of their tax pool, their talent, their track record and their technology. It's an unbeatable package. And it's confirmed to me by CEO after CEO who says, look, the reason we have moved our global business to your country is not just because of the location, not just because of the English language, not just because of the corporate tax rate. It is because of the passion, the creativity, and the ingenuity of your young people. That's our future, and that's why we need to keep them here at home. So as we set out on the continued path of government with a whole series of changes about reform and rebuilding, we have to look to our own, as I said, our political DNA, to that of our ancestors, to the men and women who founded this state. And I'm going down next Thursday to Ardnacrusha, which was a massive project at the start of the first government of the state, and the element of expenditure that took from the national budget. But it was brought to their attention by a young engineer called McLaughlin, who worked for Siemens, who said, this is something you should do for Ireland. And think of the scale of that in the years in which it happened. And think of the opportunities that we now have in this modern age of 2012, where we were able to sign a strategic partnership agreement with Britain only a few months ago, and where the Minister for Energy is now actively dealing with his counterpart about the possibility of us being able to sign a memorandum of understanding to use the national assets that we have here of wind and wave and water to sell directly electricity into the British market at no cost to ourselves if we can get the system right with the suppliers over there. But 15 years after his father, John A. Costello, declared the Irish Republic, his son, Declan Costello, published his document Towards a Just Society. He said, "We have, it is true, achieved freedom from foreign rule for most of our country, and our citizens enjoy freedom from arbitrary arrest. But freedom is much more than the absence of tyranny. It only becomes real when economic and social conditions permit the full development of the human personality." So, after so many years of fog and confusion in this battle for our freedom, for our economic freedom, for our sovereignty, this is the challenge that we face up ahead. They said it could never be done at a European Council meeting, and yet at 4 a.m. in the morning, the decision was made by the European leaders to break the link between sovereign and bank. And written into that document, there are only 17 countries in the Eurozone, 2 were mentioned, Spain and Ireland. And I was happy to see Mr. Draghi and Commissioner Rehn say they would like to have this concluded in Ireland's case by the end of October, and that whatever deal may be done for Spain will be reflected in the programme for Ireland. I think that's important, and it's the start of further confidence and hope in a long journey here towards restoring our economic sovereignty and being able to fly ourselves. Because it's only then that we will realise the full development of the human personality and what Irish people can achieve, which we know that they're capable of. Because it's only then that we will see the social conditions prevail that will allow all our people to really flourish. And nothing less than flourishing in what our proud and what our noble people is what they deserve. So reform, rebuilding and renewal are absolutely central to this objective. And from my tenure and my remit as Taoiseach na hÉireann, this will never be far from my eyesight. Thank you very much indeed.